Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Oxford for our latest edition of the Oxford Seminars in Cartography. My name is Nick Millee. I am the map curator here at the Bodleian Library. For those of you unfamiliar with this series, myself and my colleague Liz Bagent co-convene TOSCA, and Liz will be joining us later for the Q&A. So I will begin with a few announcements of forthcoming events. This time, with us being quite late in the academic year, we have no events at our sister series, Maps and Society at the Warburg Institute, to announce. Likewise, Cambridge University's series is now finished for this academic year, so they will come back to life in the autumn. However, there is a talk coming up which may well be of interest to people in the audience tonight. On Thursday, the 25th of June at 1 p.m. UK time, the first annual Warwick Map History Research Group lecture, which is supported by the Global History and Culture Centre. And the speaker is Matthew Edney, who will be familiar to many of you in the audience. And Matthew will be speaking on materiality and process, foundations for effective map histories. And I think Stuart will be putting something in the chat announcing that in due course. So that's something to look forward to. In terms of TOSCA, we have one more event coming up this academic year, which will be in a fortnight's time on Thursday, the 18th of June, where Nick Bolton, the CEO of Ordnance Survey, Britain's national mapping agency, will be speaking on Ordnance Survey, 21st Century National Mapping Agency. So we very much look forward to hearing Nick speak about Ordnance Survey. To join up, sign up for that, go through the usual channels and go to the TOSCA website and you can register there. It will be online, as is this one. So this evening, I am delighted to be able to introduce Jean-Marc Besse to you. Jean-Marc will be speaking on geography and Catholic censorship in Europe at the end of the 16th century. Now, for those of you who don't know Jean-Marc, he's a research director at the CNRS and a director of studies at the EHESS. He's the co-editor of the journal Les Carnets du Paysage and the chair of the History Committee of the French Cartographic Committee. His research focuses, on the one hand, on the history of representations and practices of space and landscape theory, and on the other, on the epistemology of geographical knowledge in the modern and contemporary eras. His books include the 2003 title Les Grandeurs de la Terre, Aspects du Savoir Géographique à la Renaissance. Also from 2003, Face au Monde, Atlas Jardin Gérama. 2009, Le Goût du Monde, Exercice de Paysage. 2013, Habiter. And in 2018, La Nécessité du Paysage. There was a reissued version of Voir la Terre in 2022. Also in 2022, Forme du Savoir, Forme de Pouvoir, les atlas géographiques à l'époque moderne et contemporaine. 2023, Quelle est la raison des quatre? And there are two forthcoming titles as well. These are L'œil d'histoire, espace et cartographie, the eye of history, space and cartography, and Un nouveau monde, savoir et pratique géographique en Europe au XVIe siècle, a new world, geographical knowledge and practices in 16th century Europe. Now, we're just about ready for Jean-Marc to take over. So there he is. And if you can unmute yourself, Jean-Marc, and share your screen. And I wish you good luck tonight. We're really looking forward to this.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. I share my screen. Just a moment. Okay.
Go down into presentation mode, Jean-Marc, and then we'll be good.
Is that okay for you?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again. Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to warmly thank Nick and Elizabeth for inviting me in this seminar. I am very happy to be able to present a work in that it is a work in progress, you know. But I would like to, I would be happy to discuss it with you if it is possible, of course. It is a work in progress, which depends very much on the original archives I am able to gather, and that, as you know, takes time. I will therefore only be able to present provisional results, and of course I apologize for that. But I begin. During the second half of the 16th century, a large number of printed works were produced in Europe with the aim of providing an organized synthesis of the geographical knowledge that had been accumulated over the former decades. These works had a performative vocation, whether as anthology of travel accounts, collections of maps and atlases, or descriptive cosmographies. They set up in European culture an updated image of the world, and in this sense, they played a considerable role in the geographical education of Europeans. It is in this context that the issue of the spiritual and ideological control of this new image of the world opens up, particularly for religious and political authorities. The question that arises is not only how this new geographical image of the world can be organized, but also how it can be conceived and taken up from a moral and political point of view. More precisely, what is at stake is to identify or define centralities, hierarchies, and direction to follow in this geographical space that has become universal. In other words, the issue at stake is not only the organization of geographical knowledge, but also the ideological and spiritual power of the world's geographical image. It's a problem of spiritual geopolitics, as it were, or symbolic control of representations of space. This is the point at which geography is affected by the major political and religious conflicts of the 16th century. This general issue leads to very concrete situations for producers of geographical books and designers of maps. Some question, for example, how and where should they select their sources? How should they choose their references? What were the bibliographic choices to be made? What was to be shown and said about the world, and how? The world of printing and book selling, of which map makers are a part, is deeply affected by these questions. In this sense, we must not separate the world of map makers and of geographers from the more general world of book production. What we need to analyze are the editorial, social, and material mechanism within which maps and geographical books are produced and distributed. And in this respect, maps, as well as books, and particularly books containing maps and city views, are the objects of explicit attention from Catholic and university authorities in Europe. Authorities which seek to control or at least verify their content and, above all, as we shall see, their authors. Let's take a first example. The importance of bibliographies in 16th century training strategies is well known. The Bibliotheca Selecta, 1593, by the Jesuit Antonio Posevino, contains a chapter devoted to geography and cartography, to which is added a list of reference books and authors. The Bibliotheca Selecta was intended for Jesuit colleges and more generally for the training of young Christian princes. The aim was to select what should and should not be read. Posevino's aim in composing his own bibliographies was to oppose those composed by Protestant thinkers, especially Konrad Gessner. For Posevino, the essential vocation of geography is spiritual contemplation. It reveals the order and beauty of the world and manifests divine glory. Posevino places geography in the tradition of commentary on the book of Genesis. This fusion of geographers and theologian skies sheds light on the importance Posevino attaches to the teaching of geography, as if geography could only be understood from a religious perspective. Indeed, having defined geography as a description of the terrestrial world, and having pointed to Ptolemy as the first geographer to have produced maps, from which all his successors drew inspiration, Posevino claims the preeminence of Moses as the first among those who wrote geography, before Ptolemy, Strabo, Marinus, Eratosthenes, or Homer. Moses was considered by Posevino as the true origin of geography. According to Posevino, Moses was the first geographer. The geography of Moses, according to Posevino, clearly explains the reasons for the existence of the created world and the division of its parts. The professor of geography has to develop what is read in Genesis from the description of the paradise, the rivers that bathe it, and the first man to inhabit the earth. Geography is, above all, what we could call a geographia sacra. The teaching of geography, namely the understanding of the organization of spaces on the Earth's surface, is based on a general interpretation grid provided by the Bible. The Geographia Sacra gives meaning to the history of humankind. Posevino's project is prescriptive, not only in terms of the content and objectives of geographical teaching, but also in terms of reference books and cartographic material. At the end of his chapter of geography, Posevino adds a long list of authors and works. If we look at Posevino's selections, we can see that he mentions several editions of Ptolemy, the 1579 edition of Ortelius Theatrum Orbis Terrarum and the first maps published by Mercator for his atlas. All in all, Possevino's knowledge of the geographical printing market of his time is quite precise or in line with this market. But in this list of some 80 names, the name of Sebastian Münster and other Protestant authors as Joachim Vadian, Caspar Peusser, Michael Neander, and so on, is missing. John Bryan Harley once reminded us that absences are just as important as presences in maps. This is also true for books. The absence of Münster's name is quite significant. Münster was declared to be heretical by the Catholic Inquisition, and therefore his name could not be mentioned, neither could his books be read or possessed. However, the importance of Protestant geographical production in the 16th century and its role as a driving force in the renewal of geography must be emphasized. Münster's Cosmographia Universalis was a model against which Catholics has to situate themselves. Nor should we forget that, in terms of Geographia Sacra, Protestant circles held an almost exclusive monopoly on maps of Palestine. Protestants also developed a highly sophisticated discourse on the relationship between geography and theology. The situation was therefore one of competition, and Possevino's response was silence, cancellation, and censorship. It was precisely in this context that in 1573 the Archbishop of Nicosia, Filippo Mocenigo, was investigated by the Roman Inquisition. The trigger for the Holy Office investigation and trial involved the denunciation by a Dominican monk, Fra Antonio, who had seen some years ago, in 1562, Archbishop Mocenigo holding a copy of Ptolemy's Geography in the edition commented on by Sebastian Münster. This was a work whose distribution and possession had been forbidden by the Inquisition since 1559. Nobody could read this book without permission, as we can read in the manuscript inscription that is written on the Jesuit Collegio Romano copy on the right side of the screen. Let's take another example. The Salamanca University Library in Spain holds a copy of Mercator's Atlas, edited by Iodocus Hondius in 1606. This edition was expurgated as part of a commission appointed by the Inquisition. Several passages of the Atlas text are covered in black ink, particularly those concerning Protestants, as can be seen in the map and text, bold text, concerning Lake Leman and Geneva, the home of Calvinism. In the remainder of my presentation, I will describe the censorship and control operations implemented by Roman Catholic authorities to prevent the spread of Protestant ideas in the context of the creation of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, what is named Holy Office, in 1542. This first congregation was followed by another, the Congregation of the Index, in 1571. The the operation of control implemented by these congregations were extensive in nature. All fields of knowledge and culture were concerned, including theology, medicine, natural history, literature and other fields. What we are talking about here is an attempt to globally control and direct print production and distribution, both in the commercial sphere of bookselling and printing and in the private sphere of libraries. An entire bureaucracy was put in place to guarantee the effectiveness of these control operations. Lists of works to be inspected and censored were drawn up. Commissions were set up to produce reports, and above all, general principles were defined on the basis on which works could be examined, censored, and banned. The core of these operations was a book, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, published in 1559, in which authors and works to be evaluated were collected and classified. This practice of compiling lists of books to be examined was not proper to Rome. They could be found in other places in Europe, as Venice, Antwerp, or Lisbon. There are many questions to answer. What about geographers in these lists? Who were the geographers concerned? How were their works received and evaluated? Is there an evolution in the way these works were received and reacted to? Do different authors receive different treatment or different works by the same author? I will focus on two cases whose Inquisition reports have been able to analyze. Sebastian Münster, and in his Cosmographia Universalis in the 1550 edition on the left side, and Abraham Ortelius and his Theatrum Orbis Terrarum in the 1574 edition, as well as that of 79. There are many other authors of geographical books and maps whose works could be included here, but I will only examine these two cases in order to shed light on the more general mechanism of Catholic censorship in the 16th century. The Münster case is exemplary. Münster was considered to be a heretic by the first Roman index published in 1559. As such, all his works, geographical and non-geographical, were banned. Even his name has to be erased, along with the image of his face, as we can see in the copies of the Cosmographia Universalis held in the National Library in Lisbon on the left side, or in the Municipal Library in Valenciennes in the north of France on the right side. He was not the only one. This was also the case for Erasmus, for example, and many others. The effects of this ban were radical. Censors intervened in works already in print, cutting out and deleting all the elements that were considered to be unacceptable. The first version of the index was considered to be excessive. However, even for the Catholic hierarchy. And a second version was produced and published in 1564, excuse me, 1554. For our concern, there are two important points. On the one hand, it became possible to separate an author and the books he produced. And on the other, it was possible to read and even republish a book once it had been subjected to censorship examination. That is, expunged of its reprehensible parts and corrected. Within the framework of the 1671 Congregation of the Index, the Catholic authorities defined the principles for the expurgation and correction of suspect books and prepared new editions of these books under the control of the Inquisition. My point here is that censorship is not only negative, that is, it no longer simply prohibits, but also becomes a positive operation, so to speak, in the production of knowledge. This is precisely what happens with Münster's Cosmographia Universalis. Münster was still presented in the new index as a heretical author, but the Cosmographia could be read under certain conditions. First, his name and all Protestant names had to be removed. And secondly, several passages in the book had to be cancelled or corrected. As you can see, the book was very carefully read. But the question I would like to address now is the following. How were these new rules applied and adapted by book owners, whether librarians, religious congregations, or private individuals? Answers vary, but it is clear that book owners were aware of the new rules and played with them, as it were. Let's take a few examples. In 1598, in the copy held at the Municipal Library of Saint-Omer in northern France. At this time, the city was under the Spanish rule, and many English Catholics sought refuge there. In this city, a priest named André Panis wrote a note on the title page of the book in Latin, as you see. He wanted to warn, I quote, the Christian reader that the author, Münster, was a heretic, I quote, a heretic whose writings are particularly suspect, especially when he reports the actions of some pope or man of the ecclesiastical order, which he exaggerates in such a way that it would not be entirely foreign to falsehood. End of quote. But the book remained available in the library. The Madrid copy makes a clear distinction between the author, who was condemned, and the book, which was authorized to be read. The book could be read, but the author's face, like that of Erasmus, had to be erased. Another example. The copy in the Milano library reflect the same attitude. The owner has indicated Münster's name by hand and that the book has been corrected and expurgated. Another example, the Roman copy demonstrates an even more flexible use of censorship. Münster's name and face are barely crossed out with the stroke of a pen. Let me emphasize that this kind of operation is, in the Roman case, for example, is making visible what is to be erased at the same time. In most of the other printed copies I have been able to consult, the censor tried to erase entire passages from the Cosmographia to a greater or lesser extent, or to correct them. I take four examples of this practice. The copy in the Lille Municipal Library in the north of France, it's a French translation of the Cosmographia. The copy seeks to erase or at least expose parts in the book that are hostile to the Pope and the Catholic Church. The Madrid copy corrects the passage where Münster speaks of the superstitious attitudes of Spaniards, substituting the word studiosus. The funny thing is that we find the same correction in other copies elsewhere in Europe. As you see, the controls are very meticulous and extensive. In the two copies of the Cosmographia held in the Valenciennes Municipal Library, still in the north of France, we can observe more widespread and systematic interventions. The first one, in the Latin editions of 1550, belonged to a Franciscan order, the Récollets. It was examined by Georges Colvener, a professor of theology at the University of Douai. As can be seen, and I'll show you some pages of this edition, the censor's interventions are extensive and far-reaching, and sometimes even quite impressive. This is the same case in the second copy in the French edition of 1552, which belonged to the Carmelite convent in Valenciennes. I'll show you some pages. The way of counseling is a little different, but quite efficient. It should be noted that during the 16th century, the town of Valenciennes had witnessed several Protestant uprisings, followed by Catholic harsh repression. The town had come under Spanish rule. What was at stake here in all these intervention within Münster's Cosmographia, according to me, was clearly the control of history, and more precisely the control of the place of the Catholic Church within the historical narrative. However, as far as I know, maps and city views, in other words, specific geographical iconography, were not modified, corrected, or expunged, even for the representation of Protestant cities such as Basel or Geneva. The Inquisition's main concern was to find names and to cancel the presence of people and actors of the Reformation. In other words, it seems that the Catholic authorities were trying to appropriate Münster's work for their own use, but without mentioning the author or the problematic parts. For the Catholic, the aim was to orient, or rather reorient, the image of the world as elaborated by a Protestant author through appropriation. Is it possible to speak simply of a culture of effacement or cancellation? It's worth pointing out that in terms of content, it is not possible to draw a clear distinction between Catholic and Protestant geography at that time. It is more or less the same image of the world that is presented on both sides of the religious divide in Europe. And I think that this is in line with the fact that religious affiliation were sometimes very fluid. This led to the publication of a corrected Italian version of the Cosmographia Universale under the Italian title of Cosmographia Universale in 1575. Under the control of the Venetian Inquisition and the ecclesiastical censors appointed by Philip II. But even in this case, as you can see, also this is a copy published by the Catholic authorities. Censorship continues to be applied, as can be seen in this copy held in the Biblioteca Alessandrina in Rome, where we can see the name of Münster, that the name of Münster has been cancelled. The general issue that needs to be addressed is the effectiveness of the prohibition measures implemented by the Roman authorities and the limits of the Catholic Church's ability to exercise control. The Vatican temporal power, and therefore that of the Roman Inquisition, could only be exercised directly within the territorial limits of the Papal States. Beyond that, whether in parts of Italy such as Venice or Naples, or even in other Catholic countries, attitudes and legal regimes were subject to variations. What is more, the Inquisition was not present everywhere, and the mass of publications to be controlled was considerable. The congregation of the index lacked competent staff to read text, report infractions, and propose corrections. Finally, it is important to stress the contradictions that exist within the Roman Church itself, either between the various inquisitorial congregations or between the Inquisition itself and the bishops who wished to preserve their power of censorship. The case of the censorship of Ortelius Theatrum Orbis Terrarum is clear in this respect. The editions of 1574 and 79 were the subject of an in-depth examination within the framework of a commission headed by Cardinal Colonna, which was a very important cardinal at that time. Once again, the censor's aim was not to correct the maps, but rather the names. More precisely, The aim was to delete all references to Protestant names in the catalogue of authors, in the Synonymia Locorum Geographicorum, and also for each map. Here again, the name Münster appears many times, among many others to be deleted, in Latin deleatur. This systematic survey ultimately led to a proposal for a corrected edition. However, the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum was not placed on the index. It was not banned, and above all, the requests for corrections were not taken up by Ortelius, if he was ever aware of them. Later editions of the Theatrum remained unchanged, and we have seen at the beginning of this talk that Possevino could recommend it in his bibliography of geographical works. One might ask why. In 1573, Ortelius was appointed geographer to the King of Spain, thanks to his friend Benito Arias Montano, who was a chaplain of Philip II. Arias Montano, who had lived in Antwerp, was close to Ortelius. He convinced Juan de Ovando, president of the Council of the Indies, to provide Ortelius and his collaborators with information and cartographic documents, particularly related to Spain. In other words, Ortelius was part of the Spanish network, and as such, he was protected from the power of Rome, of the Roman Church. This is my hypothesis. Therefore, when it comes to the diffusion and control of geographic and cartographic productions at the end of the 16th century, it is necessary to take into account specific legal and political contexts and structures. There was no uniform attitude to Catholic censorship, but above all, it is important to emphasize the determination of the Roman Catholic Church in appropriating and directing European intellectual production by erasing the Protestant presence. The cartographic image of the world, whatever its actual producers, was to become a Catholic image, whose authors were to be declared Catholics or disappear as such. I will conclude briefly with a few questions and lines of research, which will need to be explored further at a later date. The first relates to the principles followed by the Inquisition in selecting passages to be removed or corrected. More specifically, it is the question of the application or applicability of these principles across the various provinces of Europe. As we have seen, there is a certain variety in local attitudes, a degree of freedom that remains in relation to the recommendation from Rome. This opens the way for a body of research into local context and the local actors involved in censorship operations, as we have seen in the case of the city of Valenciennes in northern France. The second question concerns Ortelius, or rather, more generally, the influence of both religious and political networks in the creation of a geographical image of the world. We know that during his journey through Italy in the winter of 1577-78, Ortelius met in Venice, Rome, and Naples several figures who were both central to intellectual life and not orthodox in religious terms. That is, in relation to the Catholic Church. Not to mention his links with Benito Arias Montano. What role did these encounters and networks of friendship play in the development of the geographical image of the terrestrial world? Finally, the third question, that of the relationship between text and maps, more specifically, the status of maps from the perspective of censorship. I would like to leave this question open. It is true that, so far, I have not found any maps or place names on maps that have been censored. But that does not mean that such cases do not exist or that I will not find them in the future in other places, other libraries. Do not hesitate to contact me if you have heard of them. The research goes on. And thank you for your attention. As I said previously, this is a work in progress, and I am not sure to be able to answer all the questions you may have, but thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jean-Marc. That was intriguing and absolutely fascinating, and you address lots of questions that I'm sure are new to most of our audience. Can I remind our audience that Jean-Marc has kindly agreed to answer questions. So if you have any, you will see at the bottom of your screen a question and answer facility, and do put any questions that you have in there. Don't use the chat because that may be overlooked by the panel, but there's a chance to ask anything that you would like to by using the Q&A facility. So can I perhaps...
Excuse me, Elizabeth, can I shut the PowerPoint?
That's entirely up to you. You can leave it open if you think that you would like to refer back to any of the texts, but you can shut it and then reopen it just as you wish. So can I perhaps start things by asking you just to say a little bit more about this intriguing fact that you haven't found any maps themselves that have been censored. As post Harley, we're all used to thinking of maps as being non-neutral documents. So it's very interesting that in the contexts in which you're discussing them, the text is seen to be very partial, very partisan, but the maps themselves are not. And I wonder if you could elaborate that a bit. I mean, you've mentioned just negative evidence, the fact that you haven't seen any alterations to maps, but have you found any discussions in any of the texts about, we must censor the text, but we don't need to alter the maps?
This is a true question, a very important question, but I observe and I read very carefully the maps. For example, in the Valenciennes, the last copies of Münster Cosmographia, I observe very carefully the maps and the city views that are presented in these two copies, And the first copy is very impressive, the copies of the Récollet, which is like a contemporary work of art, with this black ink. But there is no intervention on any city views or any maps, This is very intriguing for me. And I'm still wondering why, As if, as you said, that maps were neutral. This is very, as if maps were considered as objective pieces of knowledge.
Yeah.
I think that this is very interesting when in thinking of the relation between the importance of maps and the importance of the text in the 16th century geography, as if text were more important than maps,
Mm. Yeah. And I wonder, can we glean any clues from thinking about maps as not necessarily cartographic objects, but a type of image? I mean, was it the case that other images weren't defaced? I mean, we've seen the portraits,
Mhm.
which were defaced, but you mentioned the city view, so they weren't defaced at all. So, and is there any other kind of image apart from a map and a city view, which is again taken as a sort of neutral?
That was, for example, if we take the other non-geographical works by Münster, you
Yeah,
know, um, for example, the works of Münster of where he presents the mathematical and tools, for example, mathematical method.
yeah,
There is no intervention on the representation on the drawings that represent the mathematical, geometrical tools, but the name of Münster and the face of Münster are cancelled. So my hypothesis is there is an opposition, a competition, and a will to appropriate by the Catholic Church a work made by a Protestant and to eliminate a Protestant.
yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. Well, we have lots of questions coming in now, so let me turn to the question and answer. So the first one is less a question than a comment. So Diana Patterson says, "Thank you, very very interesting," and I'm sure we'll all agree with that. Thank you. So our first question then comes from Mark Clark, who says, "Were any maps actually withdrawn rather than altered from copies of censored books that you have looked at?"
Sorry, I didn't understand.
We have been discussing censorship of the maps themselves, and Mark Clark would like to know whether any were in fact completely removed, so not altered with lines through, but
No,
actually removed.
in the copies I have, I was able to observe and to analyze, and when we can compare different copies on the same table in the library, the maps are the same. There is no lack of maps, if you want.
Yeah,
All
thank you.
maps are there.
Yeah. And similarly, Jacqueline asks, is there evidence that whole cartographic books were banned or removed? Or were the censorship actions just deletions of texts, as you described? So again, probing this question of whether any maps suffered.
I, I could not really answer this question. I must go back to Rome and to the archive. But
Yeah.
there are three main authors who are attentively considered by the Roman Church and the
Mm.
Roman Inquisition: Münster, Ortelius, and Mercator. And uh, Mercator and Ortelius, the maps of Mercator and Ortelius are very precisely read and controlled. You know, all the maps are commented on. And this is very impressive, you know. All the maps in the two editions, for example, in the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum of Ortelius, in 74 and 79 edition, there are notations on all, for all maps, all the maps. But uh, there are other authors, but I did not find reports for the moment.
Yeah. I suppose that is the problem of negative evidence as well, that if there is no book in the library, it's difficult to work out why it is not in the library. Thank you. And we have another question here from an anonymous member of our audience who asks, do you see any meaningful parallels between 16th century censorship of maps and modern debates over who controls geographical information, such as digital mapping platforms or state restrictions on maps?
Yes, I see. So according to me, I think there is a relationship between the two attitudes, the Catholic attitude and the contemporary attitude about censorship, about the will to orient the reading of the world, you know, the representation of the world, and what should be see and should be seen and should be told about the world. You know, yeah, I agree with that proposition.
Yeah. So do you see sort of the arguments that this cartographic knowledge should be free in the digital sphere? Is that a particularly Protestant view then, do you think, the legacy of a Protestant view, or is that going to...
Maybe.
Thank you. Then we have a question from one of our previous speakers in the series, so Vera Dorofieva-Lichtman, who asks, could it be that changing a text is technically easier than modifying a map?
Yes, it could be. It could be a reason, yeah, a good argument, but the interventions, the corrections on the text are so important sometimes that, according to me, that cannot be only a technical reason, you know. I think there is, and the choice of the passages, of the parts that are cancelled, show that there is an ideological motivation behind the choice of cancellation,
And
excuse me, it is clear that it's more difficult to modify a map than to modify a text. That's true, but this is not the main reason, according to me, is not technical, is more ideological.
And I suppose a lot of the contentious parts on the maps might be textual annotations, cartouches, or place names, for example. So that doesn't quite explain how they were exempt. So thank you for your response to that. So we have another member of our audience, Sarah Coulson Phillips, who also wants to thank you for the fascinating talk. And a question now from another TOSCA past speaker, Mary Pedley, who asks, at what point do Catholic authors embrace maps as having an explanatory role in elucidating sacred texts and history? did the maps of sacred geography in Ortelius's Paragon undergo particular scrutiny?
The Paragon was observed, was analyzed in the few maps in the 1779 edition, and observed and analyzed. But at that time, I think the Paragon editions was not totally developed, and I did not see something specific about these maps.
Thank you. And the Mary's first question was, at what point do Catholic authorities embrace maps as having an explanatory role in elucidating sacred texts and history? So not particularly Ortelius, but in general.
I'm not sure. I'm not able to answer this question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. While we're waiting for some other questions to come in, perhaps I could ask you again something that you may well not have had time to think about, because, as you say, this is a live research project, which makes it so interesting. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about from a Protestant perspective. That is it clear that Protestants are reading the texts that you mention as Protestant texts, or whether the Protestant element is so mild as to make them seem neutral in a sense?
How to answer the question, but it is clear that the passages that are cancelled or corrected
Yes.
by the Catholic Church concern mainly the deeds of the popes, the Catholic history,
Yeah.
the some monks' attitude in certain convent in Austria, for example, and so on. And I think that if we read carefully some passages of Münster Cosmographia, it is clear that it is a Protestant text,
Mm.
It expresses a Protestant position and a Protestant appreciation of the history of the church.
Mm. But is the geography itself likely to have been read as
No, I don't think. I don't think it's more historic.
it's more the history side? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is interesting. Thank you. And
As if geography was a kind of a parenthesis, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. And is there any censorship of place names which might refer to
No,
Protestant
no.
figures? There's nothing of this. No.
This is strange, but I thought that the name of the Geneva or I don't know could be erased. But no, no.
Yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. Thank you. So, and perhaps moving on from the things that you've presented this evening, you could tell us where you hope to take your research in the future.
Oh, in the future, I would like to continue to find out other copies of Münster, for example, and I would like to, if it could be possible, to find some copies of Münster and of Ortelius and of Mercator mainly in non-European countries, For
Yeah.
Mexico or in South America or in other places, But I would like, for example, the South American Inquisition in Mexico, Lima, or other places. How uh, is their reaction? You know, the is the distance from the center of the European center uh, is important or not? Is this distance opens the possibility of a kind of freedom, you know,
Yeah.
vis-à-vis Rome? This is a first direction I would like to go into. A second direction, it will be. I think Mercator could be the editions of the Atlas of Mercator could be very interesting to observe, to analyze. And I did not do make the research for the moment. And in the future, I think Mercator will be an important also for me.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a member of our audience who's again extends warm thanks to you and wonders how many people didn't censor the books but told the Inquisition that they had. But again, I think that's an evidential problem in
Yeah.
following
It's hard
that up.
to answer this question. But the,
Yeah. And I wonder if you can see any particular variation in the level of censorship according to who is doing the censoring, which is perhaps a reframing of this last question, whether, for example, Jesuits were particularly assiduous and other orders not so much, or whether it's not possible to.
it depends on the place. It depends on this. Maybe it depends on the religious order. Maybe if in fact Jesuits are more calm with the and in Valenciennes it was very impressive because the two orders and the first Récollet was a Franciscan order, and it was a moment where a Catholic Church, Spaniards wanted to get back in this city, which was an important city at the moment for economic reasons and political reasons and military reasons. And the attitude, the reaction of the Récollet, of this Franciscan, new Franciscan order, was very, very harsh. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
And maybe my surprise was to see the Jesuit attitude in Rome, in the Collegio Romano, because they were relatively free in mind, whereas they were near the center. And
Yeah.
this is very interesting.
Well, I guess Franciscans
Ah,
might have been expected to take
yeah.
a strong line.
Franciscans
Yeah.
are more serious, more serious in censoring.
Yeah, sort of alive to the dangers of the world, perhaps.
And,
Yeah.
and there is another difference. If you are a member of a religious order, and if you are a librarian in a convent, for example, you have to be quite serious. But
Mm.
if you are a private owner of the book, you know, we know that Inquisition came to inspect your copy of the book.
Mhm.
in Italy, for example, I showed you, I've shown you a book from Milano, who was it? It was a private owner at the beginning,
Mhm.
but you can, as a private owner, be relatively calm with the question of censorship.
Yeah, yeah. And do the kind of censorship that you pointed out, where you just draw a line through, but
Mhm, mhm.
perfectly visible. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to all our attenders who've posed a very interesting set of questions there. Could I echo Jean-Marc's appeal for others who may have information to share with him from, we have a very international audience with us this evening. So if you have any comments from South America or other places, please do send them to Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc, may
I will
Stuart
be very happy if it would be possible. Yeah,
may Stuart put your email address in the
of
chat
course, of
box?
course. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so perhaps that would be if Stuart can do that, then everybody will be able to share any information that they have.
Thanks a lot in advance. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we have another question that's just come through from Catherine Mary Bowness, who asks, do you think the Catholic powers were aware of the paradox, since if they order an owner to censor a passage, then they are really asking the owner to read and pay attention to the heretical ideas anyway?
Yes, I think they were totally aware of the problem.
Yeah.
Uh, they wanted to. did- In Portugal and Spain and Italy, there were many examination, many visits of inquisitorial groups within the libraries, within the private libraries, and there were many expectations vis-à-vis of these private owners to control their readings. I don't know if I am clear, but uh, no, I think Catholic authorities were totally aware of the problem of controlling all that were published at this moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating talk and a very erudite and intriguing selection of answers to our questions. And I'm sure the audience will want to join me in thanking you very warmly for just a very, very thought-provoking evening.
I thank you deeply,
Mm.
I
We've all thoroughly enjoyed it. So may I draw things now to a close, since we have no open questions, by thanking Stuart, who's kept at all the technical side of things going this evening, and reminding our audience that we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time for our last seminar of the academic year with Nick Bolton, who will be speaking about the British Ordnance Survey and futures for that. But now I'd just like to reiterate very warm thanks to Jean-Marc and wish our audience a very good evening from Oxford. Thank you.